Wie schön, Sie alle hier zu sehen. Wir sind heute ungewöhnlich wenige. I'm going to switch to English, sorry. We're not that many people today, which is a loss for everybody else, because I want to present you one of the most famous and best experts on espionage security services in Europe, a modest superstar, modest but a superstar, Andrei Soldatov. And I'm happy to have you here. He flew in from London. He's flying back tomorrow morning. And he was here 4 weeks ago at Concordia. So that's why a few people who might be interested already saw him. But we decided we're going to have a cozy, smart, and exciting discussion, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so, Andrei, I'm going to present you, and you can tell me whenever I say something that's not right. Okay? So, as I already said, he's one of the most famous investigative journalists as well, not only experts of Russia, co-founder and editor of the website and research organization Agentura.ru, which focuses on Russian secret services. He does that since 1999, but also writes for famous international media. He studied journalism in Moscow, first worked for Сегодня, where he met his wife Irina, who wrote this book with him and works with him, and is like his partner in crime. They worked together for Izvestia, for Versia, for Echo Moskvy, for Moscow News, for Novaya Gazeta. All the big, rather liberal or more or less independent, then independent media. They once and again did not write the official version of what the Russian government wanted them to write about the state of affairs. They covered wars and attacks and terrorist attacks, and they were in Beslan. You remember that huge attack. 2000, he and his wife, the journalist and co-author Irina Borogan, when they founded Agentura.ru, in order to publish information and analysis about the Russian secret services and their role in the state and Russian wars in undermining freedom in the world, were still kind of unhampered. I mean, that was possible then. You could work on secret services in Russia without being threatened. But in 2020, the license of Agentura.ru got revoked with the argument that their founders are dead. One of their founders sits here. So that was kind of an amazing argument. And we just talked about that, and you said, well, I'm not dead, but that could not be revoked. That was it. And you interpreted this as a threat and left Moscow. Yeah. And you went into exile, and now you live in London under police with the help of the police to not be attacked again. Shortly afterwards, your Austrian bank accounts were closed, which is always interesting because I always wonder, was that Raiffeisen or who helped?
It was Bank Austria.
Bank Austria, okay. Someone always helps with closing those things. Yeah. And another thing that I want to mention before we dive into the story is your father, Andrei, Alexei. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's a mistake. Alexei, one of the most famous internet inventors and pioneers in Russia, was jailed 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago. Under what circumstances and why was he jailed? To your amazement?
Well, because first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege for me to be here, and I think last time I was here was probably 7 or 8 years ago when Marie Mendra had a conversation here with Vladimir Ryzhkov, and it was very memorable for me. So back to your question, my father, he brought the internet into the country, and that is why back in 1990 when it was still the Soviet Union, and that is why he built a significant part of the internet infrastructure in Russia. And of course, these days, everything about the internet is political. So at some point, the government wanted to nationalize everything. And they approached him. He said no. They approached him again. He's been quite...
With what?
With,
sharing his...
Like, you need to give up these things because they should be state-owned. Under control of the state. Well, he said no, especially there was one thing, he found a way how to, back in the 1990s, how to save the domain name SU, which stands for Soviet Union. And back then it was nothing with nostalgia for the Soviet Union. He just believed that this domain name could be used by people on the former on the territory of the former Soviet Union, and people could just use it as RU or RF or whatever. And it's a very unusual thing, because usually when you have your country disbanded, the domain name is killed. Like there is, for instance, no domain name for Yugoslavia. So he found a way how to convince the Americans to save his domain name, and that was it. It was just a thing which anybody could use. But of course, after the annexation of Crimea, for Putin, everything connected with the words the Soviet Union became so important and so political. That was one of the things my father was approached about. And again, he said foolishly no. And finally, they opened a criminal investigation against him before I left the country. It was in 2019. He spent several years under house arrest. And finally, they put him in jail. And it was quite difficult for the family. But on the bright side, he was released this August, so now he's fine.
So now he's fine, and everybody's at least relieved about that.
Yes.
Just one more question before we dive into this book, which is the reason why we're here today. You wrote a lot of other books about the Red Web, about the compatriots, about the FSB, about the whole system and structure of secret services. You left with all that knowledge. Now you live in London. Do you live more or less peacefully, or do you feel threatened, like many other, I don't know whether to say dissidents or people in exile?
Well, to be honest, unfortunately, given all this history of Russian intelligence and security services, and we are not talking about Putin, we are talking not only about Soviet intelligence agencies. It started under the Tsar, because the Russian state has been always extremely paranoid about the immigrants. There was always this idea that at some point a bunch of immigrants could get back to the country and destroy it completely. And because they really believed that this is the history of the Russian Revolution of 1917, they became even more paranoid in the Soviet times and now. Of course, it has nothing to do with reality. I mean, Russian Empire was not destroyed by a bunch of immigrants, and well, there were other reasons, for instance, the First World War. But that is what the security people have in mind, that the immigrants, they pose this existential threat. So it's a very strange, I would say, schizophrenic attitude to the Russian immigrant community. On the one hand, they always dismiss them as completely insignificant. They always mock people like Vladimir Karamurza or Ilya Yashin or Navalny when he was in Germany. At the same time...
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
You say émigrés. I mean, émigré is like an almost objective word. Émigré is someone who leaves the country. But none of them left because they wanted to.
Well, and I would say there is a special... Well, Russians always use words in a very special way. So there are two words to describe people who left the country. Émigrés, since the Soviet times, this word is used to describe enemies of the state. People who left and who are in opposition.
Are supposed to be enemies of the state. Okay.
Absolutely, yes. A word for people who left the country but who stayed loyal to the Kremlin. These people are called compatriots.
Okay.
So there's always this distinction. So when the Kremlin is talking about the immigrants, everybody understands that they're talking about people they perceive as enemies.
And a dissident is an immigrant who lives abroad?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, then you got it. Okay, let's talk about this book. It's called Our Dear Friends in Moscow, The Inside Story of a Broken Generation. It begins in the first years of Putin's rule. I'm just going to sum it up before I start to ask. And it describes the personal and professional life of a group of friends and journalists, his friends and journalists, and how they decided to cope or not cope with the system. So we're talking about like a stretch of almost or more than 20 years. It's a personal book, maybe your first really personal book in a way, which was started soon after 2022, after the full-scale invasion into Ukraine. That was a game changer, the Ukraine war, because so many people support the war. Why did that war make such a big difference in the end? Why was it such a game changer for so many of your friends, or did they lose it long before?
Well, I think they moved to the dark side long before, but with every political crisis, starting with Beslan, for instance, they were getting more and more aggressive. I remember one of the guys we describe in the book, and who was a very good friend of mine, and he was a war correspondent, a very brave journalist, and we were together in many really difficult spots, from the siege of the theater in Moscow in 2002, Dubrovka, to Beslan, to the war in Lebanon in 2006. Immediately after Beslan, he said, "Andrei, did you hear what Putin said about Beslan?" And I was surprised, because we all knew that Putin was absolutely absent all 3 days of the crisis. He acted as a coward, and on this very last day, when everything was over and kids were killed, he made his speech. And I said, "Yes, I heard that, but I was not really impressed." And all of a sudden, Baranov said, "It was such a great speech. It reminds me of Stalin's speech." And I was so surprised that somebody in 2004 would talk about Stalin as a good example.
Yeah. I asked about the Ukraine war in the beginning, before introducing all the figures, because to us, the full-scale invasion, 224, not necessarily 214, was like their turning point, their Zeitenwende. But that's why I was asking, most of your colleagues and friends changed their minds, you know, and their attitudes. It was a long process. It was not like a shock thing. Okay. In the book, the intro is, this book is the story of Putin's campaign to wall off Russia from the West, told through a group of friends who were on the front line of the ideological battle over Russia's future. Many of them ended as key players on Putin's side. From those that you picked, did one of your friends not, besides the two of you? Because this says many, but I read like, it reads like all.
We describe a group of 6 people. We all started in Izvestia, apart from one girl. She joined us later because she married this guy Baranov, and now she's a minister of culture, by the way, of the Russian Federation, and she's responsible for horrible things, including sponsoring the movies praising the war, and she's partly in charge of the program of re-education of Ukrainian kids on the annexed and invaded territories, so it's very bad. But of course, we decided to focus only on people who decided to work for Putin consciously, and not because we were brainwashed, but because it was a very conscious choice. Of course, there were some other people, and we are still in touch with them, and they are brave and good people, but we didn't put them in a book because they're still in Moscow, and I do not want to put them in danger.
I guess that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
You already mentioned your friend, the culture minister. Before we talk about those people and what happened during this time, these friends, you met all of them at Izvestia at the end of the 1990s, 2000, exactly. They were Evgeny Krutikov, Sveta Babayeva, Petya Akopov, Zhenya Baranov, and his wife Olga Lublimova. You don't have to remember those names, but he does. Who are they, in short?
Yes. Evgeny Krutikov was the head of the department we worked together, as a political department, and he was really good at writing about Russian intelligence agencies, and he was slightly older than me, so for me he was my mentor. And also, of course, what was important about him, there was always some mystery about him, because he came from a very prominent Soviet family. His granddad was deputy prime minister under Stalin. His father was a promising young intelligence officer when Stalin died, and then something happened. He was in Paris, stationed as a spy. He was recalled to Moscow, and the father, and sent to jail. And he spent several years in jail. So that affected the whole family of Krutikov, but it didn't affect it to the extent that he turned against.
Exactly. I remember reading that and thinking,
yeah,
why didn't they hate Stalin after that? But there was still some admiration.
I think what was important for Krutikov and actually for all our protagonists is this feeling of belonging to Soviet elites. And that was extremely important for Krutikov. He knew that his granddad was important.
So it's the nomenclatura thing. You always want to be on the top.
Yes. At some point, Irina, when they had an argument between them, Irina Maikova and Krutikov, and it was really late, and we were drunk and all of that. And at some point, and Irina, in her family, lots of people suffered of Stalin's repressions, and she shouted at him like, "You are servants of the regime," and he countered, "No, we are the regime." So for him, this feeling of belonging to the people on top.
That was the pride of.
Yes, it's extremely important.
Having to say.
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Okay.
So, Petya Akopov was what you might call an embodiment of the Russian intellectual. He was like in big glasses, always deep in some book, but with some weird ideas. For instance, he was really crazy about China and North Korea. He collected probably thousands of books about these two countries. He collected stamps of North Korea and China. Like his apartment was full of these things. He was always talking about that. Sometimes he proudly called himself a Russian fascist, but at the time we believed it was some sort of intellectual game. So we thought, that's fine, he's just trying to make a point and trying to impress us, but actually it's not that bad. His wife, of course, was our main, like the center of our group, because she invited us to the apartment. We have all our meetings in the apartment on Gogolevsky Boulevard, which was great. And finally, nice place. And his friend Evgeny Baranov became also part of our group, and he was this war correspondent. And finally, there was Svetlana Babaeva. She was the later culture minister. You already mentioned her. No. She was not. Am I mistaken? No, she's the only person who is not alive today. Oh, sorry. And I think her story is probably the most instructive. If you want to understand how brutal is Putin's system, which he built in the country. So she was a very prominent political journalist. She was part of so-called presidential pool. It means a group of journalists who can...
She was what? I didn't get that.
It's a presidential pool.
Oh, the pool. Oh, like the pool of with Donald Trump, something
yes,
like
exactly.
The Putin pool.
So Putin and Yeltsin, they always have had a group of journalists, 20 people, 25, who always accompany the Russian president in his travels across the country, but also outside. And that gives you an unprecedented access to the president, to his circle, to his friends, and it's a great thing if you're a journalist. So she was that close to Putin, and she was very close to Yeltsin before. She also found a very good protection provided by probably the closest friend of Putin at the time, Sergei Ivanov. Who was, by the way, among all these guys from the KGB, the only general of the KGB. Putin, as you remember, was just lieutenant colonel. So Ivanov was a big guy. He was at some point the Minister of Defense. Then he was the head of the administration of the president. He provided protection for her, and he helped her in her career. At some point, she got a very fashionable posting in Washington, D.C., got connected with really important people, like she became very friendly with Donald Rumsfeld at some point. She then had a posting in London. So everything was fine about her. But when she got back to Moscow, and that was 2014, apparently 14, the year of the annexation, I think something affected her what this time she spent in the West. She started writing articles very critical of the way things done in Russian politics. She was not really enthusiastic about the annexation of Crimea. And well, Sergei Ivanov lost his position, so it resulted in a decision to expel her of all other places to Crimea, to Simferopol, which is a very, very small, tiny town in the center of the peninsula. Yeah, well, it's warm, but I mean...
Far away from things.
Yeah, think about it. After London, after Washington, after Moscow, you end up in Simferopol. To do what? So she was getting... It's a very sad story, because she... I understand that over all these years, she got really addicted to this access to power, and she was looking for this kind of adrenaline elsewhere. So she started with horses. And next thing was mountains. Next thing was fighting with knives. The very next thing, she started training with special forces. And she got really good at it at very professional level. And now we are in 2022. Putin just started his invasion. And I think she was, and as far as I know from people, for mutual connections, mutual friends, that she got so desperate that she decided to go to Ukraine, not as an embedded journalist with Russian forces, but as a Russian soldier. And just before her deployment, she was at the shooting range, again with special forces, and she was killed by a friendly fire. Another guy, special forces, Russian special forces soldiers are shot, and there was a ricochet, and she was killed instantly. So thanks God she never made it to Ukraine. She didn't kill anyone. But think about it, that she was so desperate to get back into the system, back to Moscow, but she was ready to go to the war as a soldier. And she was killed, because this is how this system works.
We're going to talk about how the system works just in a minute. I just wanted to try to understand some coordinates. All these people work for Putin. They believe in the system. They walked a long way away from you, or you walked a long way away from them, however you put it. Why did they even talk to you?
Well, my suspicion is that, yes, I need to explain that, but as a journalist, we cannot just write this book as a memoir and to write about these people, what they remember about them. So, of course, as a journalist, you need to talk to people.
They answered. They talked to you.
Yes, and we reached out to all of them. Only one person refused to talk, the minister, actually. All the rest responded. And I think the reason is all of them, just by coincidence, all of them are trained historians. And they always thought of themselves, because they're so ambitious, they wanted to have a place in history. For them it was...
Place in History is that book?
Yes.
The Lost Generation?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Well, that's how it works for them. Because...
Seriously?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because...
So maybe they wanted to say something positive and then, you know,
just to be part of this... of this period of history, just to get this place.
But you're a foreign agent. They must have gotten in trouble for talking to you, even if they were been talking positively.
Well, first of all, they're quite smart and they understand that they are not, I mean, they are sufficiently on top of the system to understand how things actually work. And maybe, I don't know, maybe some of them asked if they could talk to us.
And would you today sit down with any of them for a glass of wine and talk about personal things, or is that unfeasible?
Not with a glass of wine, to be honest, because it's just emotionally was very, very difficult to write this book.
Tell us more about
because that. It was extremely difficult for Irina, because she needed, we sort of, the way we work, and we co-authored 4 books, and this is our 4th book. And we've been always writing together, so the way we work, we decide which part of the story you investigate, you have the list of people you need to interview, and you sort of decide who's doing what. So she decided to talk to the guy, Petya Kopov, because she always loved him, and probably she was closer to him than me. The problem was that Petya Kopov is the journalist who probably you all remember him, because not by his name, but by what he did. When the full-scale invasion started, he wrote a really horrible article for RIA Novosti, where he said 2 things. First of all, that the war was already won, which was funny. But also he said, well, now it is the time to finally solve the Ukrainian question. And the words he used, unfortunately, are very close to the language used by Hitler. And to think that's...
Endlösung, or what
yes. Yeah, and the final solution. And to be honest, just to feel and to think that these words were actually said by someone you knew and you were close with was very difficult. So Irina decided to talk to him. And of course, it's you start with, I mean, we had many conversations with them, and Irina had many conversations with him. And she decided to ask the most difficult questions at the very end, because you always know as a journalist that maybe this is your last conversation. So she decided to approach this topic by saying, look, Petya, I should tell you that I have relatives in Ukraine. We all have relatives in Ukraine, but she has relatives in the Odessa region, and she told him that, look, my auntie, and she's 80 years old, she's forced to spend her nights on the street because of fear of being buried under the rubble, because there are constant bombardments. What do you think about it? And he said, I'm very sorry for your relatives, but this is a historical moment for Russia, and it is, of course, it's a tragedy, just like the Russian Revolution 1917, and because it's a historical moment, we won't stop. And I saw the moment when Irina got really silent, and she couldn't speak for several hours after this conversation. So it's really, really difficult emotionally. And to have a kind of regular conversation with these people now, it's, of course, it's not easy.
I mean, what you're describing has many facets. You know, it has the journalistic facet. It has the facet of the political. How do I put that? People bowing to the regime, you know, and feeling terrible about that. But on the other hand, when you look at so many Ukrainians who have Russian relatives, Russians who have Ukrainian friends, families that split, relatives that don't talk anymore to each other, husband and wife who stop talking, this is maybe one of the biggest dramas of this, excuse me, fucking war, that it rips so many families and friends apart who cannot even find any common place about that war. So that was part of the sadness that engulfed you, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah. And of course, it's that's what you're absolutely right. That's what makes this war so horrible, because there's so many connections. And I have relatives in Ukraine. I mean, almost everyone has some relatives in Ukraine, and still people support it. So this book is our attempt to try to find an explanation why. Okay. Well, for these people, apparently, there are two main explanations. One is all of them feel extremely nostalgic for the Soviet Union, and I think it's partly, it has something to do with the status the country lost, but also the status their families lost because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Even if they made spectacular careers, they still feel that in the Soviet Union they would achieve more. But I think the most important part of this support is that all of them, surprisingly, share a very dark vision of Russia.
Can you explain that?
All of them think that Russia is a country which could be run only by a dictator, and if you have any ambitions in your life, you need to accept that, and you need to understand that there are only two ways. If you want to achieve something, you work for this dictator. If you're against him, you are a loser, and basically that's what they told us. And I think the most spectacular explanation in public, which we got from these guys, even before the book was published, Olga Lyubimova, who is a Minister of Culture, as I said, she's slightly younger than me, so of course, she doesn't remember the Soviet Union, but she's also unusually open about her feelings. So in the late 2000s and early 2010s, she had a blog on LiveJournal. She was extremely open on this blog about her feelings. At that moment, we had Moscow protests in 2011, 2012. So what she did, she posted what she called a manifesto of Lyubimova. And in this manifesto, she said, she wrote that I see lots of my friends going to the streets to protest.
That was the rigged elections in 2010.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote, I see many of my friends going to the streets to protest. I don't understand the point. I think it's absolutely useless. I, as a woman, adopted many years ago a maxima that in this country, you need to live as a woman being raped. You just need to spread your leg and try to enjoy it.
Okay, I'm speechless now. That doesn't happen very often.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it was a very honest and brutally honest assessment of how things are in the country. And she became, as you know, now she's a Minister of Culture.
But all these people, many of these people had been in the West. They've been traveling. They are educated. They lived in the 1990s. Wild, chaotic, frustrating, maybe scary in a way, but at least kind of semi-democratic. So did they decide that what they saw in the West and what they experienced in the 90s was a reason to decide that now a dictator is the only thing that can save us? Or is that the old Russophile, imperialistic, I don't know what, exceptionalism, whatever you take it?
No, it's a bit more complicated for these guys. First of all, it's quite interesting that sometimes people forget that for many people in Moscow, in the Russian elites, not for ordinary Russians, but minor conflicts the country went through in the 1990s had a huge effect. All of these guys, at some point, they spent time in places like South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Most of these guys had an unusually close affiliation with Serbia.
With Serbia?
Yes. Baranov, for instance, he covered the war in 1999, the NATO bombings, and he's been there for many years, and he became very obsessed with Serbia. So for these people, the most recent history of the region looks like a series of attacks from the West, undermining not just the Russian sphere of influence, but Slavic people by destroying Slavic people from the thing.
I don't get it. We're talking about Abkhazia and Ossetia,
yes.
But those were wars that were fought by Russia.
No.
Sorry.
For them. It's all started in, well, it's a long story, but it's all started in 1990, 1991, when there was the first war launched by Georgia against a region of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And of course, from that moment, they never believed in the idea of democratic Georgia. They believed that Georgia was just a puppet regime, which was supported by the Americans to undermine Russia and the testament of the brutality of the regime. That's what they did in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. For them, it's a very clear narrative. And then, of course, they watched what was going on in Yugoslavia, and they were always on the side of Serbs. And again, they took it as a sign that now you have the West attacking us via attacking Serbia. And after that, you just get the list of never-ending grievances against the West. You have like...
Which is a self-fulfilling prophecy after a while when you start believing in it, because you look for reasons to believe that, because as we know...
You're trying to identify the signs, the early signs of the next crisis. For instance, Baranov was quite instrumental at defining the narrative of how the Maidan revolution of 2014 was actually seen in Moscow. And he defined it in a way that we got all the signs, and actually the revolution in Maidan was defined in a way the events in Serbia were done before. So for him, it was a continuation of the same tactics. Yes.
Paid by the US, initiated by the CIA, all those stories.
Yes.
I see. This whole thing was a process. It took 20 years in one way or the other, probably sometimes quicker, sometimes less quick. You already mentioned a few things, Serbia and 2014, but there's almost 20 years in between. What happened? Are we talking about all the color revolutions? Are we talking about Georgia? And are we talking about, I don't know, other...
I think Georgia...
Orange Revolution, I don't know, all those attempts for independence?
I think Georgia was extremely important, maybe more important than we used to think, because it was a very short, relatively short war, and with not a lot of casualties. But it was really important because of two things. First, it was the first war where Russian propaganda decided not to focus on, say, atrocities committed by the Georgian army, which we all expected them to do. They decided to focus on hypocrisy of the West.
Into the picture.
Exactly. And the second thing was that it was the very first time in my life when I was talking to people, relatively young guys in their 20s, who are well off, well educated, they were making a lot of money, for instance, in IT businesses. And all of them, all of a sudden, started telling me that this is the moment they are getting proud of their army. So apparently, I never thought that before, apparently the humiliation of the Russian army during the two wars in Chechnya and in Afghanistan was a big thing, even for the younger generation. And Putin found a way how to play on this feeling to the younger generation in the 2000s. And that's how he got his support from this new generation, not from some people who remembered what it was like under the Soviet Union, but of the younger generation. And these guys said, now we got our prosperity, thank you, we got our stability, thank you very much, but also we got our pride back. And it's about the army. So this connection, that actually you can get something like that.
And if you get that, you can more easily support the invasion in 2022 if you're proud of the army.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. One of the chapters in that book is called Losing One's Soul. What do you mean?
Remind me what was in that chapter, because
okay.
Okay.
Sorry. I remember reading it, and then afterwards I thought, who lost whose soul when? But okay, we can skip that.
I think it was, now I think I remember that, it was about the annexation of Crimea, because that was a moment when something changed and in the air, well, as before, but it was a significant shift because people you used to think that you used to understand, they became so aggressive that you cannot be with them in one room. And the annexation of Crimea was that point. The war in Georgia, we all understood back then with our friends, we were on different sides, but it was still possible to talk to each other. After the protests in 2011-2012, it became impossible to talk to only one guy, to Petya Kopov, because he reposted a list of the enemies of the state, and we found our names on this list. So for us, it was a clear sign that he went personal, and it never happened before. And you were really taken aback, like, why are you attacking us personally? It was never like that. So we stopped talking to him. But it was still possible to talk to other guys. After the annexation of Crimea, something really, really big happened, like a big fundamental shift. And you understand that it's a real civil war, just not fought by real weapons on the streets of Moscow. But
it's an internal civil war,
yes,
which
exactly.
You cannot see from the outside, like a closed civil war.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a moment, as you probably remember, that Putin started using a new kind of language against journalists. Before that, we were...
Well, he started using a different language anyways. He was getting much more radical and much more ugly and much more, I don't know, proletarisch. He was...
But he never used the words national traitors before against journalists. So he used all kinds of words, like we were corrupt, obviously, and horrible and insignificant. I remember when he said that there was no sense to kill Politkovskaya because she was absolutely insignificant. So he was always insulting journalists.
He was belittling them, and then he was getting aggressive.
Yes,
okay.
And he called us national traitors, basically.
Okay. In one interview, not in the book, you said, for most of them, the most important thing was being Russian. For us, the most important thing was to be journalists. I was wondering, why can't you be both?
No, I hope it's still possible, but what I was talking about, these days, of course, identity is the most important thing. And to be honest, for me, the feeling of belonging to this community of journalists was extremely important, always. Always, yes, personally. And I always believed that it was so great that, for instance, you found yourself in some distant part of Lebanon and you bump into some guy, a war correspondent from South Korea, and all of a sudden you speak the same language because you are doing the same job. It's such a great feeling. I know. You know that? Yeah. That is why, yeah, that is why, and also maybe it's a way for me to try to adjust to this new reality when I live in exile, because of course it's difficult and you miss lots of things. You miss your city, you miss your friends, you miss something which is already destroyed. You cannot get back to these things because there are no such things in Moscow anymore. But so you're trying to find something to stick to, and these feelings of belonging to these communities, yes, it's what it is.
What happened to you? Why were you different? Why didn't you lose your soul?
First of all, again, I think it has something to do with the legacy of the Soviet Union. I didn't come from a very prominent Soviet family. No. Yes, my father became, at some point, deputy minister in the government of Medvedev because he was in charge of the internet. But that happened only in 2007, so our family was not prominent. I had some military people in my family. My granddad was military, but his role was quite special. He actually, you might say, buried the Soviet regime because as a deputy head of the military commandant of Moscow, he was in charge of organizing state funerals. So actually, he physically buried Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, all of these guys. But again, he was just a colonel. He was never a general. So
it is really about ranks. As you said, it's a place in history, it's being part of the elite, and it's being part of the ranks. That's the story?
No. I knew when I was in my school, I knew that it would be absolutely impossible for me to become a journalist in the Soviet Union because I didn't have these kind of connections, I didn't have this kind of family. And all of a sudden, 1991, everything changed. In 1992, I got into my university and I got the highest mark, which I never got in my life before, because I was always some sort of troublemaker. So I understood that something changed fundamentally in my country, and I can do things I never thought of doing before. That was very, very, it was such a great feeling, to be honest. Okay.
We still have about half an hour, and I want to walk away from the book and enter the realm of Russia generally and the security services. But one last question, we'll get back to that anyway in one way or another. The subtitle, The Story of a Lost Generation. I want to understand that. Because maybe they feel not lost at all. They're probably proud of what they gained and think you're an idiot who walked away.
It's not only about them. It's about my generation of people who came of age when the Soviet Union collapsed. And I think we, first of all, what is important, we are the first truly happy generation of Russians.
You were?
Yes, and we are still now. And we are still now. Because look, our parents, they lived in the Soviet Union. They never had a chance to say a word publicly about what was going on in the country. They were like talking in harsh voices in their kitchens. It was horrible. It was a distorted thing. My grandparents, of course, they lived under Stalin. They never thought of being really free. They accepted the reality that you live in a country under complete control and you just need to adjust. The generations before, it was even more horrible, right?
I can't follow you. I mean, the generation now lives in a totalitarian regime. And you cannot say a word. You cannot even say, hold up a white piece of paper.
Yes. My generation of people who were born in the mid-1970s, we had our chance in the 1990s to do something, to go to journalism, to go to politics, to go to business. We got a generation of IT entrepreneurs of my age who are extremely successful. Yes, we lost it, and that is why it's lost. It's a lost generation, because we had this chance, and in general, we lost it.
So you're talking about an open door that closed again, actually.
Yes, and still I have some hopes that, first of all, we are the most active generation of the Russians, because the generation younger than us, they didn't remember that, because they didn't witness freedoms we enjoyed in the 1990s. And you can see it from, even when you talk to Russian very good journalists who are slightly younger than us, you can feel it, that for them, many things, they just don't get it. Because things under Putin became so difficult, so different. We remember what it was like. And I think that is why there is still a chance for our generation to do something about it. But as things are now, of course, yes, it's a lost chance.
Yeah. The consequences of this war are an isolation of Russia. Do you think that's intentional?
Yes, absolutely. I think it is. I think it always reminds me of a story of the Tsar Nicholas I in the 19th century, who was obsessed with political stability, and he was absolutely paranoid. At some point, when there was another revolution in France, he recalled all Russians, including Russian aristocrats from France, because he wanted to suppress the news of the revolution coming to Russia. Of course, it was very counterproductive, because if you get all these people back, of course they tell you what is going on. Very Russian way. But this kind of idea that you got all the wrong ideas only from outside of the country, so you can control things 100% only if you isolate the country completely. I think it's very important for Russian dictators.
And that's also the story of the media at the moment, and of social media, and of those new apps that you get, Max, for example, which is pre-installed on every mobile phone now, which gives the state the possibility to control everything that everybody says without or does without even you knowing, because every new mobile you buy has that. Yeah. Yes. They know what they're doing. And another thing that has changed is, you mentioned that friend of yours, or a former friend of yours, who was, who still admired Stalin despite all the things that happened. So by now we have metro stations which are renamed, and statues which are put up again, and airports which are renamed, etc. And everything's good. I mean, we're in love again, right? What's that? Where does that lead us?
Actually, it's only partly ideology. It's also very practical. It's coming from the Russian security services. The thing is that for almost 20 years, we got the ideas from the late Soviet Union. I mean, from the period of 1970s, 1980s, from the KGB, because Putin came from the KGB. But now they came to the conclusion that the KGB actually never faced such a formidable challenge as a big war, an existential war. There was a war in Afghanistan, but it was not that existential. And the last time Russia actually faced with such an existential war was the Second World War. So for them, it's absolutely logical and very practical to go back in history to Stalin methods, to Stalin practices. And that is why when the full-scale invasion started, the Kremlin, people in the security services, all of a sudden started talking about, well, we need to get back to some practices. For instance, we need to reinstate SMERSH, or we need to get back to...
you need to explain what SMERSH is.
SMERSH is a very brutal Stalin's military counterintelligence service, which was in charge of killing hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers accused of defection. It was really, truly horrible security service, disbanded by Stalin in 1946, I think. So now we are talking about getting back to these practices. They also get back, not only talking, but they actually got back to something which existed only under Stalin, big filtration camps in the occupied territories. It's a very Stalin tactics.
Sorry, one question, because you were talking about the killing of defectors. That's very interesting. Are we talking on the battlefield, or are we talking everywhere else?
Smirch killed people mostly on the battlefield, but of course there were other Stalin security services, and they killed people everywhere, including in Europe, and also after the war. Yes, of course.
Let us talk about security service. We understand. I mean, we want to profit from your expertise once we have you here. I have a few questions that interest me. You probably have some later on too. The FSB was officially renamed and officially reformed. Is it unofficially still the KGB?
No, it's much more brutal than the KGB. Again, the KGB never ever faced this kind of challenge of existential war. Actually, if you look at the history of the war in Afghanistan, there were some people from the KGB in Afghanistan, but not in big numbers. Now, every regional department of the FSB sends people to Ukraine to fight. And they're not happy with that, but they're going there, they fight there, they kill there, and then they bring the experience they got to mainland Russia. So the system is getting more and more brutal.
Sorry, again, I don't understand. Why does the FSB send people to Ukraine to fight? I mean, 1.5 million soldiers are waiting or are being sent, so why do you need FSB agents to being killed?
You need to, first of all, you need to keep these soldiers under your watch, but nothing happened, like Prigozhin's mutiny. Oh, yeah. The second thing, they need to...
so Prigozhin was that guy with the militia whose plane finally crashed after his... Yeah, exactly, thank you, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying...
The second thing they need to... main thing is to protect the troops from so-called Ukrainian guerrillas, which means control of Ukrainians in occupied territories. So they run filtration camps where you have all these Ukrainian civilians and POWs. It's a job for the FSB. And they process Ukrainian prisoners of war. Again, it's a big thing. And but the main thing, yes, it's to control the troops. And that is why they are there.
Do they have filtration camps for Russian soldiers and Russian citizens too, who maybe try?
No, it's mostly about Ukrainians. Yes, because it is a way you recruit your spies in Ukraine. You never go to Ukraine to recruit your spy. You recruit your spies on your territory,
torturing them and then sending them back.
Yes, and the best way to do that is in a filtration camp.
Okay, the KGB supported, I read, Gorbachev's reforms, because they found that the Soviet system and communism was extremely inefficient.
No.
Are they?
No, of course not. No, of course not.
That's what I thought they wanted. They wanted more efficient ways of working.
No,
I got that wrong. Okay.
No, they were.
Okay, correct me, please.
Actually, they cared only of one thing, and that is actually the main difference between the KGB and FSB. The KGB was always under control of the party. They hated that, and the party had a party cell in every department and unit of the KGB. And all KGB officers of certain rank, they should be the members of the Communist Party, which means they were answerable to the party. They hated that, and that is why they supported Gorbachev, because Gorbachev promised them to get rid of the communist control. They got that, and now they have no control whatsoever.
Gorbachev promised them full freedom.
Not for free. Well, he promised them some sort of democratic control, but it never happened. And what the KGB understood, they could get rid of the Communist Party. Okay. Mm-hmm. And now because there's no Communist Party, and the Единая Россия is not a real party, and there's no party control of the security services, they are much more brutal, and they are... Yes, exactly.
Okay. There's a lot of suicides nowadays, people falling out of windows all over the place. In the West, we keep thinking that this is because they're being pushed. As far as I read something in your book, you suggest that there might be so much compromat from time to time, so much information to pressure people that they jump on free will. I mean, in the end, it doesn't make a difference, but it's just interesting because it's a myth that everybody is being shoved out of windows.
Yes, because it is absolutely true. There is an unusual number of people who sort of killed themselves, and it started before this war. It started after the Russian interference in the US election in 2016. All of a sudden, we got lots of Russian diplomats killed in mysterious circumstances. I remember one guy who overstepped in New York on the stair and suddenly died of it. And you think, can you die of that thing because you missed a step? But apparently that was the reason provided by the Russian authorities to the New York police, that he just missed a step. Anyway, the thing is, of course, it is the tactics used by the Russian security services. And these days, because the way the Kremlin think they need to control the countries via repressions. And how they do that, usually they use this principle, they call it the principle of the object. So you identify an object you need to put under control, say the region or the ministry or the federal agency. The first thing you do, you arrest the deputy of the head of this.
You arrest the deputy of that object.
Yeah,
okay.
Like deputy governor, deputy minister, deputy head of the federal agency. And you squeeze him or her for information. And everybody understands what is going on, that this guy now, he's giving evidence on everyone in this agency. And maybe the buck would stop with this guy and nobody else would be arrested. But everybody would get this message that now you need to be extremely careful, but because there is a guy there sitting in prison giving evidence against you. So that is why we have so many criminal cases against Russian officials, because they just think that this is the best way to control Russian bureaucracy.
Okay. Whew. You also said that the West is still extremely bad in fighting the FSB, because the West does not at all understand how, what do I say, perfect they are?
Yeah, not perfect.
I know I'm not being serious, but perfect in being mean, nasty, brutal, effective.
First of all, I think, if I can be critical of the West,
Sure.
I think there was this sense of superiority after 2018 specifically, because so many Russian spies were exposed, and there was an impression that they were so stupid and incompetent and all of that, that there was an impression, a general impression, that if these guys are so incompetent, why we should care about them? The problem is that the system works in a different way. It's just like the Russian army. We can all now talk about how incompetent the Russian army is and how many casualties they sustain in Ukraine. They're still fighting. This is the same problem with the FSB. They just act on a different level. They don't care that their agents get exposed because there are so many guys. And now, because of the war, we're getting more and more people ready to go and do something stupid in the West because they got veterans. And the biggest problem in perception is we're constantly comparing things with the Cold War, which is a big mistake.
We're comparing with the Cold War?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it is a mistake because the Cold War was a relatively peaceful time in Europe. For instance, the KGB had an option of carrying out sabotage operations, but they never did that. They hid lots of stuff in Western Europe, weapons and explosive devices, but they never activated this option. They did that only during the Second World War and before that. and that is why nobody actually knows what to do about these sabotage tactics, because there are no examples in the Cold War how to counter these attacks. And that is why everybody is confused, how we can react to sabotage attacks.
About sabotage now,
Yes.
the confusion, are these Russian drones, are these Russian, I don't know what, agents doing things, because there's no precedence?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. One question where I wanted to ask, because you said the system works differently than we think. They don't care if their agents are exposed, is what you said, because they have so many. But those Skripal guys, for example, who tried to murder Sergei Skripal in London with Novichok, and then it kind of didn't really work out, and then they were caught in the end, I think by Grozhev actually again, and they gave an interview on Russian television looking exactly alike, like two clowns saying, "Oh, we just wanted to travel to London and look at the to what was it? I've forgotten." Salisbury, exactly, and look at the cathedral. And this whole thing was a joke. And I was sitting there, I wrote about that once. Exactly, it looked like a joke. But two questions. It wasn't a joke. Why was it? And then in the West, the reaction was, look how ridiculous. And again, it wasn't. What was it then?
Again, there was something missing in this picture. And what was missing was that Russian military intelligence went through a massive reform immediately after the annexation of Crimea. So what actually happened? If you give me 2 minutes to explain this, because it's a bit complicated. So under Medvedev, when Medvedev was the president, we had another Minister of Defense, Serdikov, who was a civilian Minister of Defense. So he wanted to make the Ministry of Defense and the army a bit more efficient. And he believed that the military intelligence should be smaller. And he made it smaller. He fired lots of people. He made it smaller. He humiliated military intelligence. That was a point when GRU became just GU, meaning main department. And yeah, it was really, really humiliating for these guys. What happened next? You got Putin back in the Kremlin. Putin got back his guy Shoigu as a Minister of Defense. And Shoigu decided to expand the military intelligence and to give them more resources. The problem is that if you need to expand your intelligence agency really quick, like in a few months, you need to find new people somewhere. And you cannot train them because, well, training takes time, like years. You need to find them somewhere at ready. And the only place where he could find these people were Russian special forces. That is why he recruited lots of people with special forces background. These people are not great spies. They don't speak languages, but they know how to kill people. At that moment, we got the war in Syria. And all of a sudden, it's beautifully worked out. Because that's exactly what Putin wanted from military intelligence. To fight in Donbass and to fight in Syria. And all of a sudden, the special forces guys became extremely useful. And they started using them also in Europe. Again, the problem was that we sometimes think that it's a bad thing when you get your spy caught. Not necessarily. If these guys are from special forces, they don't care of being exposed. They care of getting things done. This is the way they are trained. The other problem was that at that moment there was a game mostly between the United States and Russia. And the game was that the United States started using the tactics, it's called naming and shaming. So they started exposing publicly Russian spies. And the main objective of these tactics was to slow down Russian military intelligence, because they believed at the time, 2016, 2018, that if you expose these guys, if you name them, if you indict them, put them on the FBI list, that would force military intelligence to do damage control and to stop the operations for a while. Exactly. The Russian military intelligence responded to that, sending more people like guys who were there as a message. Like, we don't care. We have so many people.
Is that the same effect like you're sending thousands and thousands of soldiers to the front saying, we don't care whether they all die, we have so many people, we have everything in abundance?
We don't care if we're not really well trained. And the problem now is that we got the effect of what Russian Soviet military intelligence got after 1945. There are so many veterans, so many people with real fighting experience, ready to be spies. And
so it sounds like Russia has an army of spies. Is that the logic?
Well, you cannot call them real spies. They're saboteurs. They can kill. They cannot spy.
So they're not James Bond.
They're not well, James Bond was also an assassin, as you remember. He never
smart assassin.
Yes, he was a smart assassin. Yeah, but it's not like someone from John Le Carre's book.
They're not spies, they're saboteurs. Nevertheless, I want to quote something. We were talking about the GRU, which was, is it a GRU again now?
Yes.
Okay, so the GRU is the military arm? The military intelligence. So there's all kinds of arms of the security services. And in the book, The History of the GRU by Matthias Uhl, who is a German author, I read that it was mainly the bad work of the GRU, so the military intelligence, that led Putin to believe he could easily invade Ukraine. You also wrote a lot about that. Is that nonsense?
No, it's it's not completely...
Not preparing wrong, giving the wrong data, telling him it will all be very easy.
The problem was that at the time, Putin didn't believe that it would be a big war. That is why he didn't commission the GRU to do that. He commissioned his FSB to do the briefing about the chances to win the war. And in 2022, he was under the impression that the government of Ukraine would collapse almost immediately, and he believed that you just need to sort of to push things, and then you get a political change in Kiev. And that is why he trusted the FSB more, because he believed that the FSB could be politically involved, because they've been politically involved in Ukraine since 2002-3, probably. And I spent almost 20 years investigating one particular department of the FSB, the so-called Fifth Service of the FSB, which is in charge of operations in the former Soviet Union, including Ukraine. So these guys actually were there during all these revolutions, including the Maidan revolution, and these guys were commissioned by Putin to brief him about the political chances. And I think what they did was, again, it actually tells us something about the dark vision all these people have about the way the society works. They actually, I mean, if you talk to people inside of the FSB, all of them actually extremely dismissive of ordinary people. They believe, they believe that ordinary people, they're all weak, corrupt. They never believe that somebody could actually go to politics because he or she wants to achieve something. They always suspect something nefarious. And actually they are convinced that the Russian political system is also extremely corrupt and could be kept together only by repressions. And they had the same vision about Ukraine. And actually what they did, they wrote all these reports saying basically that, look, there is such a widespread corruption in Ukraine. If we attack, they would just collapse immediately. What they completely misunderstood is that the society in Ukraine is very different from the Russian society. Yeah. It's much more vibrant. And it was not, as we know, it was not only the heroism of Zelensky, but also the society. The society resisted and decided to fight. And that was completely misregarded by the FSB. And they did the same mistake with Moscow protests. They believed, and they still believe, that people who went to the streets in Moscow, they were paid by the State Department. I mean, really, how logistically you can organize that? I mean, how you can pay thousands of people in the center of Russia? I mean, how you can do that?
I just talked to a colleague from Moscow a couple of days ago who said Putin really does believe that everybody who works against him is paid by the West. That's the only logic he can understand. Yes. The only logic he can understand.
All the guys inside of the security services.
Okay. One more FSB question, and then I'll ask two more personal questions, and then I'll hand over to you. You might be tired by now. If you were to compare the FSB or all the, the whole security system of Russia with the Americans, with CIA, is the CIA on the same level in intelligence, in effectiveness, in, I don't know, in results, or can you not measure that, compare it, because they have their, as you said, completely different, inhumane logic, maybe?
I think the principles are very different. The security services of countries like Russia, and it's not only a Russian problem, of many authoritarian countries like China or Iran. What is the difference is, in those countries, the main job of security and intelligence services is to protect the political regime by attacking dissidents, by collecting intelligence, but the main thing is to protect the political regime, no matter what. For countries, for Western democracies, the main thing for intelligence agencies is to collect intelligence. So the preservation of and protection of the political regime is not the goal for the CIA, right? No. But, and there is another thing which is important to understand the differences, is that if you think of the FSB from this point of view, you would say, actually, these guys are quite effective. because Putin's been in power since 2000 and he's still okay, right? At the same time, there are problems here because the FSB is really good at conducting repressions. They are good at killing people, at poisoning people, at harassing people and intimidating them. They are not really good at collecting intelligence because there is a problem of trust inside. Everything in Russia is stuck because Putin has been on the top for so long and he's still surrounded by people who are appointed back in 2000. And of course it has an effect on many, many bureaucracies, including the FSB and also the military intelligence. And if you talk to an ordinary officer of the FSB, as I do sometimes, because that's my job, they immediately they start criticizing their generals. They believe that their generals are corrupt and blah, blah, blah. So there is a problem of mistrust within the agency. So you have the mid-level officers who maybe know something about what is going on, but they do not trust their generals. So what?
Because Putin has been ruling for 25 years and things are kind of like rotting from inside.
Sort of, yeah. There is no movement, real promotion inside. And then you have a second problem. You have the problem on the level of generals. You have generals who need to find a way in how to tell to Putin something he would not like, right? So you have two problems. And of course, that's what manifested itself so, dramatically during the mutiny of Prigozhin. Of course, people on the ground, they knew because there was the FSB people attached and assigned to Prigozhin's troops. So they knew what was going on, but they were afraid to report that to their generals. Their generals probably heard something, but they were afraid to report that to Putin. And then you got Prigozhin going to the city of Rostov. Think about it. It's not a big city. And then you have the department of the FSB in this city,
watching, and everybody applauding and standing on the street.
Barricaded themselves in their building.
Oh, did they?
Because they were afraid of leaving the building because they didn't want to interact with these guys.
Oh. Okay, I see. That story has to be written well. Gagliotti wrote a book about it, but that didn't really convince me, so we're waiting for another one. Two more questions. The work that you do means that you have to talk to people in Russia all the time, because otherwise you couldn't be... So, in a way, you never left Russia.
Yes, it's a very strange feeling because thanks to technology, you walk the streets of London and you're on the phone and you talk to someone in Krasnodar and you think it drives you crazy.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
It's really, really hard because I read all these books about all this nostalgia of the previous generation of Russian emigres and blah, 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 how they felt about leaving Russia, and it's totally different now, but it's a different challenge because you never left. You're always there. You're always inside. You're always in Russian language, and you're always thinking.
And you're always within that sick system. Sorry to say.
Yes, yes. So it's a bit challenging, but well, because I just think that it's an important job which we should do now. I'm not talking about me, but other Russian journalists in exile, and we got really good journalists in exile, and they're really eager to do their jobs, and they do that, and I think it's just important.
Last question, I promise, because you just mentioned being a journalist in the West, in London. You once said in an interview that it kind of angers you, it busies you that even anti-Putin journalists, even people who are dissidents or work against Putin, who are not convinced of Putin, are being treated with distrust in the West. Is that something that happens to you too? And why do you think that is?
No, there is one particular...
Russian is Russian?
Well, you understand that feeling, of course, especially now, because there are so many scandals with FSB agents infiltrating the Russian community. Yeah. So when you talk to people like security services and they tell you that, unfortunately, you are part of the problem and we need to treat you like that, it's inevitable, and you understand that. To be honest, there is only one thing which drives me crazy, and this is that this is my first war I cannot cover properly because As a Russian, I cannot go to Ukraine and to report this story. And I think that is very unfortunate because, I mean, we have 147 million people living in Russia. They would never go to Mars, right? We need to accept that. They would be there. We cannot, like, say that all of them are the enemies and need to be destroyed because it's just impossible and it's genocide and it's stupid. So you need to work with these people, right? And that means that we need to tell them what is going on in Ukraine, right? And now you have a problem. Who these people would trust? Would they trust Ukrainian media? Never. Would they trust Western media? Never. They would probably, maybe, there is a chance, they would trust Russian media in exile, because
so
at least...
trust Deutsche or Medusa or whatever, yeah?
Yes. But we've completely missed this chance to report what was going on in Ukraine. And I know that some of my friends and colleagues, they tried really hard. I tried many times to get into Ukraine, I felt. Some of my friends, because we had other passports, they made it to Ukraine. But again, it was very brief and not really consequential. Many Russian media and many investigative teams are working on exposing war crimes committed by the Russian authorities and Russian troops in Ukraine. But still, you cannot, as a journalist, you understand that. You cannot properly cover the war if you're not there. You need to be there. And that drives me crazy.
I haven't been for half a year and it drives me crazy. And I go regularly and still it's getting... I could go with my passport, but I'm thinking of it more and more because of, you know, the drone nights. It's you think about it's another reason. Anyways, that's taking us to another point. Okay, thank you up to here so far. Those were my questions. What are yours? We're getting a microphone. There's one arm back there. Okay. We always take two and then, okay. One here in the front and then one in the back.
Mr. Soldatov, I have a first question. Is it better now? Yeah. Are you sure that Russia now has around 140 million inhabitants? Because I have still some friends in Moscow. I worked there in the 90s, many years. And one younger guy visited us, and he told to me that there are stories within the opposite to Putin, that it is not true. There are not 100.